Hey guys, StarCraft here, and I got another interview. A few days already, fresh off of my interview with Ethan Van Skyver, I got Dave Cumbo with me. Hey, fine. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Say hi. Say
Hey,
hi.
hey, everybody. How are you?
Yep, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Dave, or as DM Cumbo, is that how you say your name, Cumbo, or how do you say it?
Yep, that's right.
All right, yeah. He is one of those, if you see my channel, who had done the Yooka-Laylee and the Cracklestone crowdfunding comics. And, well, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are probably wondering, who is this guy? And, well, you have an interesting backstory, man, of a bunch of traits. So, talk about your history. You worked at Insomniac and Wayforward.
Yeah. Well, let me just do a brief little history. I'll go back a little further than that. I finished school in 2003, and I worked for about 4 years or so at with various jobs with the toy company Fisher Price. And then I went on to move to California, where I worked at Insomniac for about 7 years, a little under 7 years. And then during the time when I was working at Insomniac, I was doing some nights and weekend stuff on just some private, story stuff for a book project, which is coming next, by the way. And then I left Insomniac to actually leave and do some contract as well as form a company, which I just called at the time. It was just a self, basically, it was just an LLC for liability protection that I just called DM Cumbo. And then I ended up changing the name to Dream Prison Press. During that time, I was doing contracts for various studios, including Wayforward, which I didn't work on site at Wayforward. It was all contract based, and I did a few projects with them. hmm And then after that, I pretty much focused almost exclusively on doing illustration work for comics and illustrated books.
So, when you worked at Insomniac, what games did you work on? Like, tell us a bit about that. 'Cause I'm pretty sure that's something people are going to want to know about.
Okay, yeah, I worked on quite a few games at Insomniac. Let's see, the library, I guess, included. Well, I know right off the top of my head, I can remember. I worked on 5 Ratchet and Clank games, starting
Nice.
with Ratchet and Clank Future, which was the first PS3 game, and then actually every Ratchet game that I worked on was PS3. I think it was 5 of them. So we had Ratchet Future 1, Future 2. There was All for One, Nexus, and what was the name of the multiplayer one?
You're asking the wrong guy.
I'm the wrong guy. Why is it eluding? The fifth one. So
I'm looking up right now.
there were 5, and Full Frontal Assault. That's what it was.
That was it. That's what it was.
And
Yep.
did that, and then I also worked on Resistance games 2 and 3, and then I got to work on one project that was well, it wasn't my favorite project to work on. called Fuse, and then after the last project I worked on was Sunset Overdrive, which I was on for a very, very short period of time.
I know of that game.
Yeah, it's fun, and that one I worked on for only about 3 months or so before I headed out. And then actually I did work on a contract basis on one more title that was kind of a small experimental project that was really just one designer at the company was developing, called Slow Down Bull, which used kind of a cute paper cutout style. So that was fun. And then, yeah, that's it with Insomniac.
So when it was Ratchet and Clank, well, since you did Yooka-Laylee, if you could ever do it, do you think it would ever be feasible for maybe you to do a crowdfunding Ratchet and Clank comic with the new game coming out?
Oh, a Ratchet and Clank crowdfund? Yes, absolutely. I'd love to do that. I did actually bring it up a couple of times. I mean, I'm pretty open with how I reach out to studios, because in today's world, you're just as likely to be successful by publicly stating your intent to do something as if you go directly to the studio. So sometimes I like to reach out. And the thing about Ratchet, it's a little confusing because I don't want to open up a can of worms in this response, but the best way to answer you is to give you kind of a bit more detail.
Go ahead.
With any project, that is a game adaptation, and this is something I've learned over the past several years, is you really have to understand that the scope, the popularity of a project really it determines a lot about its viability for what I do. Because if a project is extremely popular, well known, say like for example a Nintendo property like Super Mario Brothers, or maybe we'll say probably top tier indie slash kind of relatively well-known mainstream title like Ratchet, both of them, or like Spyro the Dragon is probably in a similar circumstance.
Yeah. Shovel Knight, or Shovel Knight too.
Oh yeah, Shovel Knight is. I actually did a test comic page for Shovel Knight. That's well known publicly that I've been pushing them. I keep joking with them that I'll do it when they're ready, but they're never ready. They're never ready. But when it comes to Ratchet and other equivalently sized properties, it's very difficult because you have to work with a larger legal negotiation, to do it properly. I mean, it's kind of frustrating, if I'm being honest, where I look around and see everybody just kind of doing fan art left and right and selling it because I'm going through the time and expense to do it the right way and contact studios and set up legal relationships. But that's the only way that I can guarantee that if I'm going to spend the time and energy required and take on the financial risk to do something like this, I really need to make sure that the studio is not going to tell me to shut it down halfway through, The
last thing you want is that cease and desist letter.
Yeah, I don't want that letter. That's right. Because they'll be right, There's nothing I can do about it.
So, but now obviously with Yooka-Laylee, you went through the proper channels and got it approved and everything.
Mm-hmm. That was...
Sorry?
Oh, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, how much involvement did they have?
You mean in terms of the creative work on the book?
Yeah.
Very, very little. The way that Yooka was kind of a strange project because it was one of those kind of magically perfect projects because the studio is very every studio has kind of a different way of approaching that kind of thing, and some studios want to have a bit more control, and some studios are kind of more free and open. And the folks who work at Playtonic Games come from the Rare pedigree, and they most of them actually are, as far as I'm aware, maybe not anymore, but at the time when they first began, most of them were kind of either at Rareware, also known, the English game studio,
right?
And they have a very kind of how to put it? It's a very self-driven studio in the sense that at least in their throughout their history back in the 90s, for example, there was a lot of independence. And so you were kind of expected to just come up and make good things. So I think a lot of them grew up on that. And when they left to form Playtonic, I think especially the studio head, Gavin Price, who is one of my favorite people in the industry. He seems to understand that to get the best work from people, sometimes you kind of have to let them go. So with the comic, there was a lot of once they approved it, they pretty much just said, here, just send us like a story and that we'll be happy with. I sent them a couple, I think maybe one or two they liked, but they rejected for various reasons. And then I think it was either the second or the third one was the one that turned into Cracklestone. And they were happy with that. And they pretty much just let me go. And I would just send them periodic results, which was also a point of frustration for me. This is not a complaint so much as it was just a nature of this kind of freedom. I prefer the freedom, to be clear. But one of the problems, of course, is that much like their Rare pedigree, Playtonic was unbelievably secretive, like way more than I'm used to. And so even with myself, even though we had an official relationship, it was like pulling teeth to get information from them. And it was kind of funny at times because when I first wrote the initial draft, this is like a chicken and an egg here, Robert. In order to get them to give me information, I had to build trust. In order to build trust, I had to write a story that they liked. But in order to write a story that they liked, I had to know more about the game so that I knew what to write the story about. I get where that's going.
Get where that's going.
Yeah. So here's what I did. This was my solution. Yooka-Laylee itself was essentially a spiritual successor, to use a cliche, of Banjo-Kazooie. And the intent by the studio was to essentially recreate that kind of banjo magic with a new title, because we had the two traditional banjo games that were made, and then they kind of dropped off. And when we finally got another banjo game, it was a very different type of game. And I think the
nuts and
intent
bolts.
with nuts and bolts, yeah. And I think the intent with Yuka was to try and get back to very much the feel of the original banjo games. And depending on who you ask, they'll give you different opinions about that. But the point is, it was so similar at the beginning that I said, you know what, banjo is one of my favorite games, and I thought, what if I write a story that's based on banjo, and then I can just adapt it to Yooka-Laylee. So here is the information I had. It was my history of playing banjo and what I remember as a kid, combined with an E3 trailer that was 4.5 minutes long for Yooka-Laylee. And that's all the information I had to work off of. So I didn't know any additional characters that weren't shown outside the trailer. And I literally would just, some of the characters were shown for a screenshot, a very quick, brief moment. And I just thought, okay, let me ask them if I can just see a little bit more about this character. But, and I referenced this in the back of the book, Robert. One of the funnier things that came up as an example of this was, I noticed that one of the characters they had from the trailer was the Cloud, one of the Cloud characters. Whose name Nimbo, the cloud with googly eyes. Yep. And there are actually two clouds. There's like a bluish cloud and this pink cloud, and they both have googly eyes. And I didn't know anything about the characters, but I knew their names because they gave me the names of the characters, and that's all they gave me. So my assumption was that they were like a husband and wife, because I did catch wind of some reference to the fact that one of the clouds is always complaining about his wife. And so I thought, the pink cloud must be his wife. So I wrote a whole scene with them where they would interact and have some back and forth for the book. And it was kind of like a husband and wife that are always making fun of each other. And I found out that it's not actually his wife, it's his niece.
Oh,
yeah.
So you found it out through, well, not through accident, but through getting it wrong is how you found out.
Yeah. That was the procedure, was essentially just to do it and then have them tell me what I got wrong. And the things I got wrong, I mean, the dialogue was very much, and it was very inappropriate, in knowing that the character was the niece.
No kidding.
Yeah, so I had to, that was hilarious, and there was so much rewriting, and I was laughing the whole time that I was rewriting. So that's the kind of thing that came up.
Now, obviously, going with Banjo-Kazooie, though, obviously there was no sister being kidnapped, no Gruntilda. So how were you able to come up with a plot that was still loosely following Banjo without the traditional trademarks of Banjo?
Oh, well, all right. So, well, there's a lot behind the flow of the story in Yuka. It's kind of a combination of things. So there are references, but there's also kind of just the way that I think about story. And I think when I write, I use a system called the moral premise, which is a bit too complex to explain here today. But
I think I got the understanding with the name. I get the understanding with the name, I think.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's at a base level, it's very simple. It's instead of a project being about something, like say it's about friendship, or it's about heroism, or it's about some other single issue, it is about a push toward either virtue or vice. And so you have kind of a conflicting journey where a character is moving either toward virtue or toward vice. And most typically a story will have a character who is moving toward vice for the, a portion of the story.
Laylee, in other words, in this story, Laylee.
Yeah.
The moment you said that, I'm like, Yuka's going towards virtue, Laylee's going towards vice. Once you said that.
Yeah. well, that's kind of, yeah. So that will be fun to talk about a little bit. Let's remind me you said that. But yeah, it's so the bad guy, so to speak, in the story. I mean, really, Yooka-Laylee, the game, has two bad guys. Both games do have two bad guys at least. That
Capital B,
one is
and
Capital B and Dr. Quack. Yeah, and so since the games kind of have this ongoing joke about how Capital B is sort of the boss of Dr. Quack, I thought it would be fun to have a story where Dr. Quack is more of the main villain this time around. And that would kind of fit in very well with the game, so that it's not competing too much or repeating the same territory. Yeah, and Doctor, but the thing about making Doctor Quack the villain, it kind of all plays in when I talk about the moral premise structure. One other kind of very simplistic part of that story method is that you have a consistent journey for all characters. So every character is kind of going on the same journey. So in the case of Yuka, Yuka is about friendship versus betrayal. And so those are the virtue and vice, respectively, that I work with for Yooka-Laylee. So every character in the story is on a journey toward friendship, and so the villain, just very simply and logically, is in a direction where they do not move toward friendship. They move further toward betrayal. And so what I thought would be fun and why Dr. Quack is the perfect villain is because, spoilers, because he does end up betraying capital B.
True.
And so as silly as the material is and as goofy as the story is, there's a foundation of, age-old truth in there that, if you betray your friends, even if you're the bad guy, if you betray your friends, they're not going to be there for you when you need them.
Right.
And so that's Dr. Quack's downfall, is that he becomes too prideful and he tries to take over the show, and that's what bites him.
Right. Well, as you were saying, similar thing with Yuka and Laylee both. With Laylee, she is just a selfish. Well, it's like not enough that you're questioning why are they friends, but more like, wow, this is one of those love. I won't say love hate friendships, but I'm trying to find the right word. You get what I mean, though, right?
Yeah. It's I like to say the love part quiet and the hate part loud. And she's a pain. The funny thing, one of the reasons I actually pushed Laylee, she's kind of similar in the game. She's very snarky and she's always picking on Yuka. And one of the reasons I love that, so this is the kind of challenge that I like from a story perspective, is if I'm telling a story about friendship, I want to figure out all the ways that I can challenge that virtue in a provable method throughout the story. And one of the ways to do that is to have Laylee. It was like a gold mine for that because Laylee is the character that challenges Yuka the most. And she presents him with so many annoying comments and obnoxious moments where she's just not there. She does not support him. She does support him, but in superficial ways, she'll constantly mock him. And the problem with that with Yuka is it eventually gets to him, and it demonstrates kind of what happens when he sort of snaps, and how to turn. I don't like a story where a character is a hero from beginning to end. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's not interesting. And so with Yuka, Yuka's kind of a strange anomaly. It's kind of like telling a story about Mario or Link from Zelda. They really have no flaws in the game. They're flawless characters because they're avatars for the player. So the player makes the flaws by losing. But in Yuka, for example, he's the same kind of character, but he's a little more in depth. But the point is, Yuka is a good-natured character who always wants to help, and he's very kind. He's very sweet. So I had to think of a way to give him a vice. And the vice that I came up with from him that was kind of the opposite of friendship in a way is that Yuka is so concerned about other people that he has to be the hero that saves the day every time. And he won't trust other people's assistance. And I thought that was kind of interesting because a character like Mario or Link or something like that would have the same kind of thing. Mario saves the day by himself. And Link saves the day by himself. But what happens if Mario and Link get a little too in over their heads? They need some help. And so the moral concept behind the story is that Yuka has to learn to accept the help of other characters in order to reach the end.
Right, which I liked. I really liked that. Also, one thing I loved about with the artwork was you really made Laylee look like a girl for once. Because that's one of the downsides with the game. You can't really tell because they go with the old Banjo-Kazooie, semi-blocky.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I've had people tell me they both like and loathe that depending on who you talk to. But the funny part about the character design of Laylee is she actually, for the majority, I probably shouldn't say this, but I guess I will.
Go ahead.
Is she was the characters were designed, I think, before they had defined one as a male and one as a female. So they kind of had a very sort of open-ended look. I mean, they're very kind of they're very
You can see
what's the word
one.
I'm
You
looking
can see.
for?
I get what you. I think without having to say any words, I get what you're saying. You in the games, you wouldn't have to know their gender until you actually saw it. A very open-ended, you could say,
Yeah,
open-ended
yeah,
design.
they eventually turned Laylee into a girl, but I think it might have been kind of a later on in the development. At that point, they had already done so much artwork that the character design was pretty much locked in. So I don't think that they consciously made a decision necessarily to have Laylee look the way that she did in terms of like defining her as a female character right away. But when I drew Laylee, I mean, part of that is my stylistic tendencies as an artist. You know, if I sit down to try and draw Laylee, it's gonna look a certain way. I mean, there's a way that I draw, and there's a way that I can't really draw.
Right.
And one of the major challenges I have with Laylee, and actually this has more to do with why her design changed, is she has a face that's extremely difficult to draw in 2D when you're trying to get a readable expression from many angles. And I mean, like 3/4 perspectives, for example, she has this extremely big, wide nose, and the wide nose covers the far eye, but it leaves part of it visible. Like if I, I was really having trouble with her expressions because I would have like a little sliver of an eye on one side, and that's not very,
Oh,
it's not very
I
readable.
got it. I got an example. Like when they're laying and she's chowing down on the snacks, like, I still say we made a mistake not buying that key. I'm looking at right now. I can only see a little bit of her eye because that big nose of hers is blocking it.
Yeah, yeah. So what I ended up doing was I enhanced the eye shapes by adding like eyelashes, and I also sort of squared up the nose a little bit so it's not so wide. And the one of the reasons I added the eyelashes with a really long strand is because that way you can see, even if I don't draw the eye, you can see the eyelash suggesting where the eye is. And so if your eyes are closed, for example, you can tell because the eyelash, and if they're open, you can tell. And the nose, kind of by shrinking that down a little bit, it prevented the obstruction of the far side of the face. So there's a lot of construction. The same thing actually happened with Yuka, but strangely, nobody notices the changes to Yuka as much, except for the fact that I made his legs a little more spindly.
Right.
Is Yuka also in the game? If you take the 3D model from the game and you look at it from a 3/4 perspective, same kind of thing, because he's got those chameleon eyes, and so the opposite eye gets obscured. It doesn't get covered up. You can see it, but again, it's just a sliver, and I don't like how that looked when I would draw it with outlines. Because you got to
Right.
remember that in the game, there's no outlines around the character. But when you draw it in 2D and you have an outline, it's like a weird, very thin sliver of white for the eye, and it just looked really weird. So what I did was I eliminated his far eye. So in any pose, you'll notice this if you look in the book, any pose where he's 3/4, you can't see his far eye. So he only has
Right.
one eye, which is kind of an obscure thing. But as you're reading the book, I don't think people really notice.
No, I didn't notice, to be honest. But I also say trouser snake.
That
So, first of all,
character's
that's a name.
yeah. Well, he's
Boy,
he's trouser and he happens to be a snake.
he's wearing trousers. He happens to be a snake, but he's also, well, he is a snake in both ways.
Yes, he is. Yeah, he's definitely the funniest character in my book.
He is definitely. Now, how did that go about? I mean, obviously, if I recall, I don't remember the trailer. I don't know if he was in it or not. But was it one of those cases where you saw him or whatnot, and then it just fell in place, or did you find about him later in the production, and you're like, oh, he's the center, what kicks it off?
Oh, he was in the trailer. That's what I think he might have been one of the earlier designs. I know that Playtonic has made this public, so I'll talk about this. But so most of these designs, bear in mind, are either directly from the game or they're. I mean, every character has been artistically redesigned a little bit for the book, but most of the characters are designed by the production team at Playtonic, and particularly Steve Mails, who was the creator of Banjo-Kazooie and Yooka-Laylee themselves.
Right.
And so Trouser, for example, was designed by him. I think originally the studio head had drawn Trouser. He wanted to have a snake that wore trousers. And I can't remember whose idea it was. It might have been Gavin's, that there was like an initial drawing, I think, where they had a snake and he just had like a half. He was like wearing half the leg, right? Because he was like wearing
Right.
trousers. And then somebody had the idea to bring the tail up through the other leg. So he looks like he's wearing trousers, yes. And oh man, it cracked me up when I first saw it. I've never stopped laughing about him because
So
he's so slimy. He always finds a way to retain his dignity in any situation. He's like the Charlie Chaplin character, where no matter what goes wrong, he just always picks it up and just keeps moving. And Trousers is the same kind of character. He'll try and convince you to the end of time that he's rich and his business is extremely successful and every item he has is amazing, but it's all just like the worst used, junk lot dealer.
Definitely. I still say though, my favorite bit from him was the whole. Fortunately for you, I happen to have an extra key in stock. I thought you said it was one of a kind. With a one of a kind of item this hot, it'd be foolish to only stock one.
Yeah,
dude, you don't know what one of a kind means.
Yeah, yeah. Trouser. That's a perfect example of that, where he's always going to dance around his own lies to just try and just close the sale any way that he can. And then once he closes the sale, he'll charge you twice what he said he was going to charge you.
Exactly. And then, of course, the big scam of all, they get the crackle stone. Oh, these batteries. What the heck? That much?
Yeah.
That was a perfect ending.
Yeah, well, that I can tell you a little bit about where that came from. Originally there was the crackle stone actually was something that was created a bit later in production, and originally there was a different sort of story MacGuffin in there, which was it was I called it the Secret Scroll. Okay, so it was actually the story was actually going to be called Yooka-Laylee and the Secret Scroll, and the Secret Scroll was basically this artifact, it was like a spell. And if you, the idea was if you read the spell of the scroll, it would make you invincible.
Oh, pretty much like the crackle stone's supposed to do.
Exactly. But the reason I replaced it is I needed a physical artifact that was something you could hold, because it felt a lot more gamey. It felt like, here's a gem that you'll hold. It was a power up, and exactly. And so I just wanted there to be something that was more of a physical attachment. But when it was the Secret Scroll, it actually had my favorite joke that I had to cut, which is easily the funniest joke in the story, but unfortunately just didn't make sense anymore. Is that the idea with the batteries is it has a little note from Trouser in the crackle stone itself. So the implication is that Trouser has kind of planned this whole fiasco. And that this is just a way for him to sell batteries. And it's all the funnier because he literally would only sell like 2 AA batteries, but that's just how bad of a businessman he is. But with the Secret Scroll, when they finally get it, just like with the crackle stone, the same kind of events happen at the end, and Yooka gets a hold of the scroll finally after this big adventure, and he looks at it, and it's like a coupon for Trousers store. And yeah, it was like and the coupon was like 1% off. So and it had a picture of him and everything. It was a crudely drawn coupon, but it still has this like glowy golden paper that's shimmery, but it's just like a cheap coupon for a store. So that was always going to be my funniest gag. But I
understand. Now, would it ever surprise you if Playtonic, if they do another game, they make a crackle stone a power up? Would that ever surprise you?
I bother them endlessly to do that because they released Impossible Lair, which is the second Yooka title.
Yep.
And I had bugged them about putting the crackle stone in, but instead of doing that, they put in. So the challenge with putting the crackle stone in, if you make it an actual power up, it's designed to make the characters invincible. So it's you wouldn't actually want to have a power up that powerful. But I always joke that they could have it like in a junk pile in the back somewhere because they just never got the batteries. I love the idea that they have this, this invincibility power up just sitting around.
Well, here's the funnier gag. Knowing Trouser Snake, they only last a few seconds anyway, and then you do another 10,000 wells.
Yeah, Well, they had a joke similar to that actually in Impossible Layer, because in Impossible Layer you can get these they call them tonics, like play
Right.
tonics,
Yep.
and the tonics will power up your character to various degrees, but you can choose up to 3 of them to go into a level. And when you meet Trouser, he says that he will give you a new tonic that will give you a 4th tonic slot. Okay, now bear
Yep.
with me with this, because it took me a while to get this joke. So he sells you a tonic that will give you a 4th tonic slot, and if you buy it, you have to use the tonic in one of your other tonic slots to unlock the 4th slot. So
Oh,
so
I get it. I get.
so
The
you
moment you
still
didn't want
only
to think
have
about it.
so you still only have the 3 spots. So that's I love that character. And but they did put me in the book as a bee, because you collect these bees
Mm-hmm.
throughout the game to
Yep.
help guide you through the unbelievably challenging Impossible Layer. And as you get these bees, you can take an extra hit. So every level you'll get a bee.
Yep.
So the bees were named after various people that worked at the company, and some people from outside in the community and following. And then there was me. I had a bee.
Right. Well, of course. I mean, it would be a shame if you weren't.
It would be a shame.
So yeah. Now, is there any plans of doing another one in the future, or was this a one-time deal?
I'd love to. I can tell you that I have written another one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in rough form right now. It's a funny concept that I would love to work with. And Platonic has suggested that they would like to work with me in the future. We haven't made definitive plans at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I have been talking on social media actually about doing a campaign for a Yooka-Laylee statue.
Ooh.
And yeah, it would be a fun experiment. I kind of want to do this premium vinyl statue,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that the fan base has been looking for something like that for some time, to kind of have a very nicely made statue / toy that they can put on their shelf and celebrate
Yeah.
the fandom of Yooka-Laylee. So I'm working on that right now. So we'll see where that comes. And as far as another book is concerned, I would love to do one. It's just the problem is I'm a 1-person studio,
Right.
and I'm currently focused on my next series, which is called Dreamside,
Right.
and that is a really, really time-consuming
I
project.
bet.
We'll see.
We will get to that in just a moment. Yep, we will get to that in just a moment. But did it surprise you at all that they actually made the digital releases DLC on the Steam version? Did that surprise you at all, or was that always part of the deal?
Well, it was always part. I wouldn't say it was always part of the deal, because these are the kinds of things that form sort of organically over time. But when I was working on the originally when I had pitched to Platonic, it was prior to the release of the first game, so I was actually working on the book, and I really had no idea how long it was going to take me. See, I was spending a lot of time on Dreamside work at that time, using a different style than I'm using right now, and it was extremely time consuming. So I thought, what if I were to do kind of a simpler, cartoonier style for something? And I thought to use that for Yooka. But then I ended up rendering Yooka in the same complex style. And so that's why the art looks very rendered and rounded and almost computer graphics like. And it took a very long time to do. So it blew past the first release, the first game's release. And I was still working on the book. And the problem that I ran into is I did know in advance that they were releasing Impossible Layer long before it was announced. But the problem is they were not prepared to make that information public at that time, because they have a way that they like to announce these things. The reason I really wanted to wait, though, until they did announce it is because I thought that if I were to work on a book based on Yooka-Laylee and there was only one game and people didn't really know if it was going to become a franchise, they might not be interested in a continued expansion like into comics. And so I thought, well, if they announce the sequel, that might help me with sales if I do a Kickstarter. So what I thought is, let me do the Kickstarter after they announce. But the problem is it just kept getting pushed back further and further and further until I couldn't wait any longer. And then I just said, okay, I've got to do the Kickstarter. So the timing of the Kickstarter wasn't ideal, because it was a long time since the first title. And it was prior to the announcement of the second title. So there were a lot of people who thought, well, wait, why are you doing a book based on a 2-year-old game that no one's playing right now? So, but my thought was, okay, I'll do the Kickstarter, and as long as it's successful, well, what we can do is when I'm done with the book, we'll do like maybe a digital tie-in with the second game, and that's where the Steam arrangement came into play, and just kind of doing some sort of a tie-in. I had a few really, I'm going to call them ambitious ideas for how to incorporate it, including actually having it be downloadable content on the Nintendo Switch. But that's not something that we could integrate because, you really have to invest in that kind of thing. The studio would have to pay the money. And it's just an expense we couldn't really afford. So, but the Steam was easy enough. I could give them a PDF and then, they could just download it along with the game itself.
Right. And that was a smart move, is how one of my friends was able to get a copy of it. And yeah, the rest is history with that. I do
have it is a little, I was not aware that it was going to be exclusively sold with the bundle pack. I do understand that you can only download it as DLC, which wasn't something that was in our original discussion, but I just kind of let that go because I figured, they know best. And part of the agreement there was, I'm trying to benefit from the game sales, and the game deserves to benefit from my sales. And so the DLC seemed like a fair arrangement to me. I think maybe they had just always assumed that this is the publisher that I had done this with, not with Playtonic. And I think they probably just assumed that I was always thinking about it as DLC. So I've got no problem with that. But if you do want to just get the book directly digitally, you can just buy it directly from my store.
Oh, yeah, that works too, of course. Now, as far as with last Yooka-Laylee question, no, of course, I'm not going to ask you if you know anything about any third game coming out, because I'm pretty sure even if there was one, you got to keep your mouth shut, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's I'm very, very used to now after, I'm going to say 17 years to some degree in various facets of the industry, that every now and again you'll hear of things that are coming out or things that are not coming out. But the fact of the matter is that, no, of course we'll put it, this is the way I like to respond, is even if I knew of something like that coming out, I wouldn't be able to talk about it. But right. I can tell you this, is that I'm very confident in the direction that Playtonic is moving. And I think I'm very excited to see more from them in the future. I think that they've demonstrated that they're willing to be really experimental with things. I mean, their first title, was this, you could call it something that kind of talked back to a game from the 90s, but that in a way is revolutionary, to kind of go back to that old school game design, and then to take the formula and try this completely different type of game for the sequel, which people compare to DKC. I can see it being compared to Donkey Kong Country, but it also added this kind of Zelda-like overworld that affects the levels. Yeah. And each level has multiple play states, so that it becomes like this. It's this extremely in-depth game. So I'm very confident that wherever they move in the future, it's going to be innovative, fun, and I want to be there every step of the way.
Yeah, and I agree, and I do wish them the best. But them releasing that second game shows they have legs, and weren't a release one and fade into the night company, which I'm pretty sure people were afraid of happening. So good on them.
Yeah. Well, they just get it done. I mean, like I said, good pedigree. They really have. These are folks that were there making games when I was a kid. To make them feel old. I mean, one of the artists there was an artist who created Battletoads on the NES.
Oh yeah. Oh boy, you say that game, and now I'm thinking back to the new one that came out, and do you have any insiders that gave their opinions on it? Do you have any insiders of Playtonic? Nope.
I don't. I didn't really talk to anybody who worked on that game. That wasn't. I don't believe it was developed by Rare. I think it was.
Well, I guess Rare, it was published, but not that team.
Yeah, I guess that must be what it is. I think it was kind of
published
by Microsoft, and but I don't know really anything about that production.
I played the game, and good Lord, felt like one of those games. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not your cup of tea, huh?
Nah, it was fun to play. Some jokes I liked, but the whole thing is, oh, why they have to do it to the Dark Queen? Well, they're going for more child-friendly stuff. Then why is she flipping them off and cursing at them?
Oh.
It's like, it's that kind
I
of
see.
thing. It's like,
Yeah.
you just shot your own excuse right in the foot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's it is funny because when I was talking, I did chat a couple of times with Kevin Bayless, who is the Battletoads designer of the
Hmm.
original show, and I remember telling him at the time, this is before I even knew about a new Battletoads, and I had said,
Hmm.
one of the things I loved about Rare's past history was Battletoads kind of had this chunky '80s toy like appearance. They I think they were really trying to do something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Oh yeah.
which itself was kind of a chunky, action figure looking series, and it was, of course, an action figure series. But with Battletoads, I think they had that kind of like that kind of '80s fantasy, very detailed art style that is at least in the obviously the NES couldn't really do that, but the in the concept art and the designs of the characters, and eventually in the game sequels, especially when they moved into the 16-bit platforms,
And the
uh,
arcade, yeah.
and the arcade, they had that very chunky kind of action figure look for the characters, which I really liked. I think whenever you do a redesign of characters that are kind of beloved over time, and they're dramatically altered, you're inevitably going to get some discomfort. You almost get kind of a what is it? The uncanny valley feel in a way,
Yep. Or
where
backlash.
or in the case of people who are angry, you get a backlash. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
dangerous and difficult to redefine. And of course, you got to remember also that when you see things like the Battletoads game, the new Battletoads game, not to get off on a tangent here, but just to address that, when you see something that's a redesign, you got to remember that you're seeing the culmination of decisions that had to be made without as much knowledge, So it's like in the
True.
beginning, nobody really knows how it's going to be received. So sometimes they might say, I'm not defending the decision. I definitely would have gone in a different direction personally, artistically, but it's difficult because sometimes people might think, well, let's try this different style because we think that would be more appealing today, for example, and
Right.
then they might find out a little too late in production that maybe we should have made a few changes, but they kind of just have to keep moving at that point. You know what I mean?
True. Oh, I know what you mean, but I could say this. But it doesn't help when you have one of the designers, particularly the one for the Dark Queen, basically, without getting political, but bring politics into it and basically make it clear that's why they did it. That's
Oh,
when
I
you
see. I
shoot the
see.
argument in the foot.
Yeah, your
You-
your goal as a character designer, like you can set different goals, right?
right.
Everyone's got different objectives, but I would
Of
say that
course.
if your objective is going to be to make a statement, if you want to make a statement, okay,
Hmm.
our artwork makes statements all the time, but
Right. Oh,
it
yeah.
really depends on the merit of the statement is going to be judged, and the more
Hmm.
of a statement you want to make, if you make it in a vitriolic fashion or you do so that's going to be upsetting to people, you have to expect a backlash. In
Hmm.
some cases, I almost wonder if people look forward to the backlash. uh,
Oh, I get that feeling too.
and sometimes I wonder about that. But with when it comes to something like the Queen, again, I'm commenting on this blind because I don't know anything about specifically what you're referring to. But I can say that if you do redesign a character and you make your intent known, just be prepared and understand that the world is kind of sometimes it's a mirror, and
Yep.
what you throw might get thrown back at you. And if I come forward and I were to make some sort of a statement, if I said, it's kind of like when I changed Yuka and Laylee's designs a little bit. When I stretched out Yuka's legs a little bit, I made him a little elongated, okay, because I needed him to put. I wanted to get more eccentric posings. The real reason is because when I would do a close up on the character on a panel, his the game model was great for the game because he was like a little box, and when you see him on the screen, it's like Mario. He's almost like 2 heads tall.
Hmm.
Okay, that looks great on the screen, and it keeps him constrained because if you have a tight little sort of box shape, then when you're on a platform type of challenge, it's easier. If you have a character with lots of limbs that are going all over the place, it's harder to tell exactly. It's harder to make those hit boxes. I don't know if you know what that is, but for a game,
I know. I
so
know.
it's
I know about hitboxes. Yeah. Basically,
okay. What?
where your window of what counts as a hit.
Yeah, yeah, or a collision for the ground. So, for example, if you
Right.
have if you have a platform that you want to jump to, when you make collision, you have your shape. Let's say a character is jumping on a leaf, okay, and the leaf is going to support the character. In order to define where the character can walk on that leaf, you have to have a collision object. And if you have the collision object be too high resolution, which instead of just being like a box, okay, then it will take up a lot of memory. And if you have too many high-res collision objects, you can get really bad performance for a game. So, like, oftentimes you'll have platforms that are designed to be a little bit more rigid and square-like because you can have low-resolution collision boxes. I'm getting technical here, but
I understand.
Where I'm going with this is, when in the comic, I needed him to be more posable. And when I would close in on the character's face for a close-up, his head would look enormous and his body would look way too small. So I shrunk his head down a little bit and gave him a longer body. But when people saw it, they were making fun of it. Some people made fun of it and said that I think the term was I had sonic boomed him.
Oh!
Which is a reference to the game Sonic Boom, where they had stretched out Sonic's legs, and which is funny. And it caused me to rethink it a little bit. I did kind of shrink his legs back up a little bit. But for me, it was just a stylistic change. And the same thing happened with Laylee. So I remember some complaints about Yuka was that I had gone in the direction of the Sonic Boom. And for Laylee, I do remember that there was at least one commenter who was upset about the direction of Laylee because this particular person was not thrilled with the fact that I had kind of it made her look female in a cliche fashion. And one of the things that she enjoyed about the character was that Laylee it was kind of difficult to tell that she was a female, and she was thinking, it's nice to have a female that doesn't have, all of these features. And I thought, okay, well, the problem is for every comment that you're going to get from people, there's an opposing comment that somebody else will make. Someone will say, oh, I hate the long legs on Yuka, and someone else will say, oh, I like that he's a bit more cartoony. And I can't, it is literally impossible for me to satisfy everybody, because if I give somebody what they want, someone else is going to be upset. Who wants the opposite direction. So I guess I don't know, how did we even get on this term? What were we talking about? Oh, the queen.
The Dark Queen. I just found an image if you want me to show you, if you want to see how she looks.
It's actually since we've been talking, I did look at it. Yeah. I actually did see this before, and I remember this kind of being an internet meme with the character. But she it's with the queen and with anything, if it's a matter specifically where the character had reasons that they wanted to tone down the character, or they maybe the original they thought was too eccentric, if that's the direction they want to work in with the game, I'm the type of person that says, look, if you want to move in this direction, that's your decision, that's fine, but just the audience will decide if they like it. It's as simple as that. And it's not wrong to go in and say, look, I want to make the queen, I guess it seems like what she did was she made the queen kind of a little less sexy. And I would say that the decision to do that might be fine. They say, look, we want to make this a bit more child friendly, and maybe the kind of sort of bikini looking outfit that she wore before was maybe not the most child friendly direction. It would be something you would see in like a Disney movie. And so we want to tone that down. I've got no problem with any of this direction. It's just be prepared for an audience reaction that's proportionate. And I think if you want to be, I mean, I know that this is kryptonite to artists to hear, but if you want to be successful, you have to consider what the audience wants. And what I would say is that I think I think it's a compromise. I think the best art, the best stuff that's going to resonate with an audience is going to be something that is a combination of something that you are passionate personally about, which can be something like that, and then is also something that works with an audience. And if you can find that middle ground, I don't think it should ever be just give the audience what they want, because you ever heard the Henry Ford quote, the famous Henry Ford quote?
They don't know, if I remember right, sometimes they don't know what they want or something like that. I might think it's something else.
Well, the one I'm thinking of is he said, if I had asked Henry Ford, of course, the founder of the Ford company, said if I'd asked people what they wanted, referring to like a focus test, they would have said a faster horse. And so I like to reference that, because it's the job of a creator who's spending all day, every day thinking about this stuff, to give people that they don't know it exists yet. And I like to think about games like The Legend of Zelda. I like to use. People will come and say, if you ask game fans what new games they would like, 99% of the list will all be sequels or remakes of things that they already like, because that's what people know. They say, look, I love Zelda. Hey, I want a new Zelda game. Or how about a new Mario that combines these Mario games together, or whatever. And but nobody, very few people will ever pitch a brand new concept. And that's because it's not their job to do that. But what I say to people when it comes to new creations, things that are creator passions, remember that the very thing that you want more of would not exist if the person had stuck with the prior thing. If you want a new Zelda, remember, if Nintendo did not deny just doing more Mario, we never would have gotten Zelda.
Right.
And so in order to get those kinds of new innovative things, artists really do have to have some degree of freedom to create these new innovative concepts. But the danger in doing that is, if you're going to combine that in a cynical fashion with something that people love dearly, something that comes from their childhood, you're treading on thin ice.
Exactly. And again, given how the game has been, I'll just say this: good thing I have the Game Pass, so I can play it without having to fork money for it. One of those type of things.
And you know, and I also I believe strongly. So
sorry if I'm coming off cynical here. I'm not usually this cynical at all.
No. I don't think it's cynical. This is entertainment. I mean, we express what we like and what we don't. I have plenty of things that I like and I don't. My thought just on it is to spin. You know, focus on things that you enjoy. And I think that with you know, when it comes to things like the look of this particular title, you know, maybe next time they'll move in a different direction, or we'll put it this way. I'll tell you what, if I ever were to make a Battletoads comic book, it would look a lot like the original art. We'll put it that way.
Right. Yeah.
But that would be me.
All right. Well, let's then move on now to the project you were talking about, which we've just been going over on Battletoads now for a while. I just forgot the name. What's your project called now?
Oh, the original series is called Dreamside, and Dreamside is actually very, very old, but it's something that I've revised over the years and is finally coming to form.
Oh, nice. Anything you want to tease about?
Yeah, well, let's kind of just describe what it is. I mean, I wrote it originally back right after school, so it was written in 2004. That was it. Yeah, it was the first script I actually finished. So I used to write scripts, not professionally, but to teach myself writing. I like the script format because I like to think of things in terms of animated movies. First of all, I wanted to make animated movies, and but it was also a great way to think about a story structure. It wasn't too long, it wasn't too short, it wasn't too complicated. I could focus on a single character. And so I wrote the screenplay for the story about a young girl. The best way to describe it is it's kind of like the never-ending story with like a medical theme.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's the original. Pretty much every story I come up with comes with like a single image that pops into my head, and then I want to make that into a story. And in this case, it was a kid who is in a hospital, kind of like a long-term patient who like has this kind of fantasy character that will come and visit her through the window. And so it was kind of like, had a little Peter Pan in it. And I just kept playing with that image. When I was in college, I used to volunteer at a children's hospital. So I would go and do artwork. So like once a week I would go and I would do artwork. And what I remember is one of the kids in particular, you know, obviously in a hospital, you're going to see different groups of people every time you go, because kids would come and they would get treatment for a day or two and then they'd be out. And so when I would go there would be different kids every time. But what for the, I'm going to say, I think it was 6 months that I went there. There was one girl who was there every day. So she was in the hospital. She was just in the hospital. She basically lived in the hospital. And she didn't, I think her treatment was she needed such consistent treatment that it was easier for her to essentially live in the hospital than to come and go. Obviously she did come and go here and there, but she was there. Point is, she was there. So I kind of got this thought of, what if somebody essentially was had such a confusing and difficult treatment that they essentially lived in the hospital, and how that would become like a sort of a weird what's the word? Purgatorial jail.
Right. Oh, that's a good one.
You don't really know if you're going in, out. You don't know what's going to happen with your life. You don't know if you're terminal. So there's a lot of challenges. And so, I gave her cancer as which is essentially, it's a setting really of the story is cancer. And then what happens in the story is that she's an artist. She likes to draw. And she ends up opening this window into a fantasy world. And she's brought into it by this kind of whimsical character that she just calls the girl from her dreams, this dream girl character that she sees, who's got this big mane of hair. And she pulls her into this fantasy world, and they end up going on this quest to find something that they call the Heart of Dreamside. And it's supposed to grant wishes, and it's supposed to sort of define one's purpose and that sort of thing. And so the story is split between the real world in the hospital and the fantasy world, and a third world of nightmares. And so it plays with this theming of dreams and colors. So the world is essentially being accosted. The fantasy world is being accosted by this monster called the Gray Dragon, which is this beast that essentially burns up color. It sort of singes color and takes color out of the world, because for Sarah, and for reasons that are defined later in the story, this is definitely not one to spoil. Right. Color is very important to her, and so as the color starts to get eradicated from the world, it kind of tears up her own fantasy, and then she kind of loses her escape from the cancer. So that's kind of the challenge, is how she can overcome this difficulty and use her fantastical powers to overcome her illness or not. And so it's an extremely deep story. It's going to be 6 books actually. It was originally going to be 3. Yeah, it's a long series. Probably what I'm looking at is 6 books that are 96 pages. And the artwork is extremely detailed. I joke online that I'm trying to make the most beautiful book ever made. It's extremely detailed artwork. It's very, very, very time consuming, very whimsical, and also very the characters are almost like porcelain dolls. It's very, very precise. And because it takes so long, I have to, in order to not make each book take years and years, I have to shorten the books a little bit, and so I'm looking at about 100-page book for each one.
Nice. That sounds great. Now, you're going to do each book individually for each campaign, I assume, right?
That's the intent. I mean, if a campaign was just insanely successful, I could always do stretch goals for more books, but I would prefer just to keep it book by book. It's kind of like my friend Jason Brubaker. He actually had a 6-book series that he did through crowdfunding, where he did each book individually. I think for the last campaign he combined books 5 and 6, but my intent with crowdfunding, and I suppose we could dip into crowdfunding a little bit.
Yep, obviously.
If you'd like. The thing about it is, when I think about crowdfunding, I don't think about it so much as an option, so much as a crowdfunding option. I think about it more as a pre-order store. And what I love about it is, I'm not sure that people really get the incredible depth of what platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo and GoFundMe offer in terms of the creative world, because the way it used to work, and I actually just mentioned, I was actually on a stream with Jason Brubaker earlier today. Let's talk about this very subject. But when you go through a traditional publishing route, which is what you really had to do, say 20 years ago,
right? What
you would have to do is you would have to capture the interest of a publisher, first of all, which usually required an agent, and to get a respectable deal. And then even if you were lucky enough to get their attention, the process you had to go through to get there was tremendous. And sometimes you'd have works that were great that were just left on the cutting room floor because they can only publish so many books. They have to make a decision, and maybe they say, okay, look, we have 10 books we want to publish, and we can only afford to publish 5. So, 5 are not getting published. And then those people who have these amazing books would get rejection letters, and they, it might cause them to give up. And they say, my book's not to be published. So you have to kind of think about how many people who might have had great books get published who could never get it done. And then comes the incredible challenge of actually making money selling books through a publisher. A lot of people think that the more prestigious your publishing deal, the more prestigious the publisher you're working with, for example, the more taken care of you'll be as a creator. And I got to be honest with you, I can't say for sure that that's not true, but I'm going to say every year I get about 5% more sure that that's the case. So to date, I am fairly certain that if you are a person like myself and you want to make your own book and you want to be able to eventually transition into making enough money from your work that you don't work another job, if you want to do that, the road to that through a publisher is nearly impossible.
I bet.
It seems that way, and I don't want to make that claim definitively, because I can tell you this: if a publisher takes an interest in you and they print enough of your books and they get it into enough stores and there's enough interest and all of the stars align, you could make a good amount of money with that. And you would
look at
also
Harry
have
Potter, look at Harry Potter or Stephen King or any of the other big name writers.
Yeah, of course. The fact that they exist means it's possible. Okay. But in the real world, you have to put the stuff in perspective. And it's whenever you hear these stories, somebody just the other day was telling me, hey, there's somebody who got, they were writing about life in the virus times. Yeah, and they had this book take off. It was like a children's book. And they said, why don't you make something like that? I said, well, it's funny because... You can't
just pull it out of your butt. You can't just pull it out of your butt like that.
What, you don't have a book producing butt? Yeah, but I think when like the rest of us do. No, no, and of course you can't do that. But even if you could, for every one case where that happens, there's like 10,000 cases where people tried the very same thing and it wouldn't work. So remember that you're seeing a vision of success disproportionately to the actual challenge. It's kind of like winning the lottery. If you hear that somebody won the lottery and you think, oh, well, I better buy a lottery ticket tomorrow because look, somebody won the lottery, so it might be me next. It's like, well, it doesn't make your chances any better.
Same thing applies to crowdfunding. Yeah.
Right. And the only thing that is guaranteed universal truth is that everyone will eventually, get too old and die. And so
death and taxes. That's the joke.
Yeah, death and taxes. Or if you're in the mafia, just death. That's an old joke. Anyway, so the thing about it is with when you're going to a publisher, you just have to realize you got to do the math on this stuff. Like, what's your important objective? Like, I talked to an artist who wants to work with a publisher, and I had this communication with her, and I said, just bear in mind, if you went to a crowdfunding direction, given she has a fairly sizable social media following, I said, I think you could probably get a good backing on Kickstarter. You probably make a lot more money. And she said, well, for me, what's more important than the money is reaching more people, even if I don't make more money. And I said, okay, in that case, it makes more sense to be published if you can get a publisher relationship, because they will sell more of your books. More will sell, but you'll make very, very, very little money on the book. So just as an example, take Yooka, which has a list price of 30 or 35, depending on which edition you get. If that goes into a store, the amount of money that I personally will make on each one of those books that is sold is going to be somewhere between 50 cents and $2. Ooh. So the book is priced at 30, but I'm going to make 50 cents to $2. Now, that's assuming that I did everything that I did. I did everything. I wrote it, I drew it, I lettered it, I worked with the manufacturer, I paid for the printing production, I did all that work. And by doing that directly and selling it directly, I could turn a $30 book into, I make more money on a book sold because I sell direct. But the problem is, how do I reach the people? So it's a trade-off, okay?
Right.
But if you have the means to reach enough people that you can get enough people to buy your book. Let's say, for example, you have a property that would sell the same whether you sell it directly or a publisher were to handle it, because maybe it's a very niche audience. Say, for example, a Yooka-Laylee book, okay?
Yep.
A Yooka-Laylee book is going to appeal to the same people, whether you buy it from Amazon or you buy it from me. It's a niche product, okay? So Yes, I might sell more copies if I sold to Amazon, if I sold through Amazon rather, or if I was in stores. I might sell more, but not that many more. Okay.
Right.
And what I would say is that the proportion of the amount that I make on a direct sale, I think, is greater than what I would get if I sold more copies but made a lot less money. So it's important to think about this kind of stuff because money is just a tool. It's a tool that allows me to make the art that I want to make. Okay.
Right.
So, when artists talk about, I often say, if you're an up and coming artist or somebody who's passionate, wants to make your stuff, the first step that you should take before you even begin drawing is get rid as soon as humanly possible of that annoying artist thing where you have to pretend to hate money. Okay. It's as soon as you can get rid of that, that would be good, because money is no different than a pen, paper. It's no different than connections in manufacturing. It's just a tool, but it's an extremely important tool. I can't draw a picture without a pen and paper. I cannot make anything happen without money.
No starving artists allowed. No starving artists allowed, right?
Well, I mean, you can be a starving artist, but you got to
I'm being funny about it. I'm being funny about it. I'm just being funny.
Well, yeah. I mean, either you or somebody is going to have to pay for life's necessities, and if you can make that happen. If you can't make that happen through your work, you're going to have to work another job, for example, or you're going to have to do something that's going to take up a lot of your time, and that's time that could be spent on your artwork. And so I think the funny thing about thinking about being successful and how to reach people, money in a lot of ways is it is what we as a society say. This is a way that we're going to say that we agree with what you're doing. Okay. It's like, I want more of what you do. Okay. Here's some money to show that happens. That way you can pay your rent. You can pay your mortgage, whatever. You can eat, you can buy new equipment. You can maybe have a family. There are things that you might want to do. And all of this takes money, and crowdfunding is the most brilliant way to go about doing this, because, and this is one more point I'll make on this before I shut up. Once you get me going, Robert.
I don't mind. I'm happy about it.
This is good information, and when it comes to publishing, one of the other major challenges the publishers face is traditionally what they would have to do is everything's a risk. They would have to say, okay, look, we've done our market research. We know that people right now like reading books that are 32 pages long and have barnyard animals. Okay. and if the cover is yellow instead of red, it will do worse.
All these weird focus groups or all this weird, marketing type of stuff.
Yes,
that makes no sense. It makes no sense when you hear it, but
yes, I agree. And I'll tell you a funny story. Remind me of focus tests. Remind me of that.
All right.
Because I will forget. But when you get these focus tests, and the reason that they do that is because they'll say, look, we're going to take a chance on this new author. We have to invest the money to do a print run of however many, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 books or whatever that we're going to get in stores. And that's going to cost a great deal of money. And what they do is they have to just kind of do the print run, and then they would have to see how it sells. Now, we do have pre-ordering on sites like Amazon, but the problem with pre-ordering is when you pre-order a book, I don't know about you, Robert, but for me, when I pre-order a book, I think of that as a sale that just isn't going to reach me yet. I don't think of it as funding. I don't think of it as telling the publisher that there's a lot of interest out there so that they can pull the trigger. I think of it as the publisher's already decided to pull the trigger, and I will get this book when it's released. Kickstarter has a totally different logic. The logic of Kickstarter is, look, we don't know if this is going to be successful. Is the support out there or not? Okay, and that way I can go and say, hey, guess what? There were 1,100 people who backed my Yooka campaign. So if I had gone and done a print run, how would I know how many copies to print? But by knowing that I had 1,100 people, I could do my print run accordingly. There's no waste.
Exactly.
I know exactly how many
you might get extra books. You might get extra books because obviously it's cheaper to do it in bulk.
Yes, and I do. I overprinted. I printed 1,500.
I know.
So
I'm just saying it's always safer to do that. Is what I'm saying. So you have extra for anyone who joined up right before the cutoff.
But yeah, if you had I definitely have more copies. But the thing is, if I had said, okay, you know what, I think Yooka, I think Yooka could sell 3,000 copies, and I had printed 3,000 copies, but I only sold 1,100. I would have to pay for all those copies. I would have to pay for warehousing. If I couldn't move them, I had to pay for demolition or to give them away. I'd have to demolish them. So publishers have always had to have this huge risk, and so there's a tremendous amount of waste in publishing because you can't predict the future. Whereas with Kickstarter, we can just collect numbers and say, look, you know what? We only had 500 people were interested in this book, but you know what? That's good enough. We'll print the book and then we'll move on to something else next time. No waste.
Exactly. You talk about with pre-ordering and all that stuff. There is one other more nastier side with pre-orders is where you have a limited amount. You have a open pre-order. You don't mention how many you're pre-ordering, and then once the product comes out, you realize, oh crud, we only had this amount, and we had a lot more pre-ordered. Crap.
Oh yeah, and that's a kind of disorganization that can happen with Kickstarter, of course.
Right. Sorry, I was going to give an example. No. The Gamera Complete Collection on Amazon.
Oh, that oversold?
No, yeah. From what I understand, they were given like 5,000. But of course, it's a Gamera Complete Collection, all 12 movies and everything in one oversized box with like all the comics, which isn't that many, all this other stuff, and it was like 125. Yeah, from what I understand, there's people out there who are still waiting on theirs.
Oh, so they probably had to do a second run too. So it's like,
but it's a limited edition. But it's a limited edition. No, that's the problem. Arrow Video made it. It's a special limited edition. And given all the features in it,
can't do
no
it
wonder.
Mm-hmm.
They might not. They might not.
I mean, I'll tell you my waste. Like my waste is this. This is the kind of waste that I have. This is how efficient this is. So when for the Yooka-Laylee campaign, I did offer a Kickstarter promised limited edition of the book. It's the one with gilded edges. Okay, so if your book has gilded edges, that means that you are a backer in the 30-day window. Okay, and I made that really clear, and it's a promise that I stuck to. But the thing is, when I printed the books, there's always the chance that something's going to get lost in the mail. I had a fair amount of international orders, and so my fear was if I printed exactly as many as I need, some are going to get lost in the mail. So I printed about 50 extras. So I thought that was safe. I think for a first campaign, I'll do 50 extra that have gold gilded edges. And they're sitting in the warehouse and they're not moving because I can't sell them because of my promise. Right. But also, the only thing I could do is make them available to those 30-day backers again and say, hey, look, I got 50 left if anybody wants any. But I can't break that promise. But the thing is, I hardly wasted any money because I only printed 50 extras. So I know I have enough. So that situation won't arise with Kickstarter unless you're really bad with your numbers.
Right. Now with other crowdfunding books, I mean, you and I have talked before. You've always looked at Doug Tanapo's stuff as a good example, and I got him and Ethan. I know Van Skyver. I know are like the both almost identical in what they do. They both get a lot of money in their campaigns, but then rather than saying, "Oh, I have this extra money, I'll have it aside for myself," they decide, "No, what can I do to give more to everyone else?"
I have studied their campaigns, and Doug's campaign. I shouldn't say I studied Ethan's. I really don't know much at all about Ethan. But
from my own experience, he does the same thing. Is what I'm saying. They both, add in more. They all toss in more added goodies for the people to give it out for stretch goals.
Yes,
but yeah.
Doug. What's funny is I tell the story sometimes. I don't know when Doug was thinking about crowdfunding originally, but I do remember seeing him in 2018 Comic-Con in San Diego, and I had a copy of his book Gear, which was reprinted in a softbound, and I went up to him and I, like a jerk, I slapped the softbound down and I said, Doug, this softcover sucks. I said, make a hardbound.
Talk about a first impression.
Well, I had loosely known Doug through some guys I worked with at Insomniac who are friends of his, because I'm a huge advocate of premium quality everything. So everything's the top notch. So my theory was this: when I was talking to him, I said, Doug, it's funny because I can't remember if he said this or somebody else told me this, but he said, I can't afford that. It doesn't make a lot of sense because in the model, it's like, look, you do these hardbounds if you sell a lot of copies. I said, it's exactly backwards. Because I said, look, chicken and egg. It's like we said earlier, Robert, if you make a softbound that's kind of crappy, people don't really want to buy it unless they just want the story. But if you make this beautiful hardbound collector's edition,
Oh yeah.
then you're gonna bring the support. It'll take time to happen. But I said, look, as somebody who loves this stuff myself, and as somebody who has occasionally collected things that I enjoy, you know where it comes from with me, Robert, is I don't know if you're not a big game player, are you? Like, I don't know if
I'm a gamer. I'm a game player. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, back in the 90s, there was this company called Working Designs, and this which is, I'm going to say, a relatively well-known indie studio that was it was a localization studio. And what they did was they brought over these primarily Japanese role-playing games and adventure games, and they would do a localization on them, and then they would package them for the States. And these were games that absolutely would never have come to the States otherwise.
Right.
And so they kind of they had a very niche market, but the thing that wasn't the thing that made Working Designs special and what people really remember about them. What people remember about Working Designs is that back in the day when you had uniform packaging, you still kind of have it to a degree, but you'll also see collector's editions and things like that. But back when you had the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, you had that uniform box. Everything came in the same box. So you'd have different artwork, but always the same box, same cardboard, same materials. The strangest thing that you would get was like when Earthbound came out and it had a strategy guide.
Right.
That was like an eccentric thing.
Yeah.
The big box, which is not worth a lot of money, by the way, if you have one of those.
Oh, yeah. The box alone.
Oh, it's so expensive. What a great game, though, Robert. I got to tell you.
Yep. I'm aware. I have not played it, but I'm aware of it.
Oh, man, it's incredible. Dream project right there. I'll tell you that if I make a comic. And Working Designs, what they made a name for themselves.
Sorry, before you go further, I got one out before I forget. Which Mother game would you want to adapt into a comic, since each one is still relatively different from the other?
If I straight adapted a book, I would definitely do Earthbound, Mother 2, the Super Nintendo title. That's the one, because I think that one has a very prime feel to it. It sort of establishes, I think Mother 3 moves in some really clever and very surreal directions. And that's great, but I think you want to have that foundation first to just kind of define the theming. And Mother deals with so many concepts. It's so spiritual, and it has a lot of it's very, very it's a cathartic game. It's a philosophical game. It has bizarre comedic elements. It has characters that you can't stop thinking about. The music is unbelievable. It's just it is a trip. It's also a real pain to play. The game is not gamer friendly. It's not, but it's unbelievable.
Medium. So Earthbound was the perfect medium. Ironically, it was the middle game.
Yeah, I would say so. Yes.
Okay, so anyway, you were saying about, back to the other topic.
Yes. Where was I?
Yeah, the company.
Working Designs. Okay, so Working
Designs.
Yeah, so Working Designs was known for doing these incredibly high quality packages. So when they would do, for example, a Sega Saturn game, it would come in the jewel case, usually, but they would have this manual that was printed with very thick paper. They'd have like a glossy cover. It was like a board cover, and then they would do foil stamping. They would do embossing. They would do all this nice stuff. And then when they started to get really advanced with their packaging, it was for games like Lunar on the PlayStation. They had like a full box set. And the instruction manual would be like a leatherette book that had gilded edges and foil on the cover.
Oh, I get what you're going with. I get what you're describing. One of those types.
Yes.
I get it.
Yes. And they were really attractive packages. And what's funny is they made the game experience a lot more enjoyable. See, when I was a kid, I remember I loved games. I loved games as a kid. I loved getting games. And one of the things that was so much fun about getting a new game was, this is how I would be. I would play the game. I would get the game. I'd go home and I'd play the game for hours and hours and hours. And then I would realize it's 2:00 in the morning and I should probably stop playing the game. Nowadays, I guess that's lightweight, right? Everyone stays up till 5. So I would play until 2 in the morning, and then I'd be like, I should stop the game. I don't want to stop the game. So what I would do is I would go and lie in bed and I would read the instruction manual.
Nice.
Because I wanted to
Nice.
continue the feeling of being in the game world. Mm-hmm.
Now, as I said, I miss those old instruction manuals where they were sometimes like the Ultima books or whatnot, those tomes or Homeworld. You remember the Homeworld instruction manual, which had like their detailed history and everything that were barely mentioned in the game, but would then be utilized in. But believe it or not, they actually utilize a lot of stuff from that book in the prequel, Desert of Kashyyyk, or not Kashyyyk, Desert of whatever it was. The prequel game they did.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, some of those PC games, man, they did have these huge manuals that were very complex. I'm thinking back in the King's Quest days and stuff like that.
Quest, yep.
King's Quest and Quest for Glory and that kind of thing. And so, the manuals and other sort of physical elements were a nice match for the digital game. They gave you something tangible and real. That you owned and you can put on your shelf and kind of look at it and say, hey, this is neat. I own this. I miss that experience a little bit. So the way Working Designs did it was just top notch. And I thought Working Designs, this is the key point to all of this, is what Working Designs and Rare were two companies that I would say, and I would say Squaresoft too, back in the 90s. Not Squaresoft now so much, but Squaresoft in the 90s. These three companies made games that it didn't matter to me what the game was. If I saw the name Rare or I saw the name Working Designs, I bought the game. Like, it didn't matter what it was because the company so consistently impressed me. Now, this happened with Rare because of the games, okay? I love the game so much that I knew I would love it. But with Working Designs, there were games that it was the experience. And the packaging had a huge part to do with that. It was strange, but I remember thinking that when the publisher put that much love into the package, it made the game feel that much more premium. And I thought, okay, this increased interest for me as a player about a game that I might not be as interested in otherwise, because this royal packaging was so beautiful. And it was just very attractive. They would do things like they would use like holographic foil, which is something I had to cut from the book. Unfortunately, the manufacturer was unable to make that work. But I had planned to do holographic foil. So actually, I've used Working Designs as a foundation for all of this. So when I was talking to Doug, as well as other people in the industry, I presented this idea of doing very, very premium everything. So if you're going to take a book, here's a little thought experiment for you, Robert. You could take say you take Earthworm Jim, okay, and one of Doug's Scholastic published books, like maybe pick up a copy of one of his Scholastic books, and you hold the two next to each other. It's funny if I take, like, I have one of his books, Newts, okay, so if I look at this Newts book, it's like 260 pages, and Earthworm Jim is 160 pages, and when I hold one up next to the other, the big epic adventure book to me is Earthworm Jim, even though
it's a big
100. I mean, it seems obvious, but even if the books were the same size in terms of the physicality of it, it's the quality of the Earthworm Jim book that gives it a lot more presence. And
I agree. I'm looking at my crowdfunding books, and there's a reason why on my thumbnail I put down, "You give Doug a run for his money," because your book is one of the standouts besides Doug's books.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. Obviously I can't. Doug makes books also that are for Bigfoots like himself. Because Doug's like 11,000 feet tall. And so he makes these books that are like 9 by 12, and they're great. But I remember at one point mentioning to Doug, "Hey, why don't you make a nice book that the rest of us can enjoy, who are not 7 feet tall?" And he said, "I don't see anything wrong with this book." I'm like, "Of course not. Your fingers are longer than my arms." So with my book, the size of the book was originally going to be 8.5 by 11 magazine format. And the reason I went with that size is when I was at E3, same time, I ran into the founder of Kinokuniya, which is a Japanese import store in Los Angeles, and I think there's one in Washington and New York City. And he came up and he saw my artwork, which was actually for Dreamside, and he was asking about it. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to do a book." And he said, and his first question after "Who's it for?" Like age group and that sort of thing. And I'd said, "Well, it's for a youth demographic." And he said, "Well, what's the size of your book?" And I said, "I was planning to do 8.5 by 11." And he said, "It's too big." He said, "Make it smaller." And I said, "Why?" I wanted to make a bigger book. And he said, "If the book is bigger than 8 by 10, then kids do not pick the book off the shelf and look through it because they feel like it's too fancy for them, or it's like an adult thing, and if it's a 8 by 10 or smaller, kids feel like it's there to be grabbed and picked up and looked through, and that's
look at manga. Look at manga. Same thing.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, manga could be printed at a larger size, and I'm always frustrated by manga. It drives me nuts that it's printed on toilet paper. I'm like, this artwork is so beautiful, and I want it to be in a big, beautiful book and printed on nice paper and really celebrate this stuff. I understand that it doesn't fit in with the manga industry, which is a rapid production. But
I know, chugga.
Oh, there's a publisher you should check out, Robert. It's called Fanfare. It's an English publisher.
Oh, I know about Fanfare. I know of Fanfare. I heard of them.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, actually, the very first industry person that I had spoken with about my zest for premium books was Fanfare, because one of the things that they did very well was they were doing localization of a manga artist named Jiro Taniguchi, who unfortunately died, I think, just 2 years ago. But he's a very famous manga artist in Japan, a great writer.
What's he known for? What's he known for?
Well, that's just the thing. He's known for a lot in Japan and nothing in the West.
Oh,
but he has probably his book that over here anyway has sold the best is probably The Walking Man. And he which is not going to be known by anybody, but the thing about it is he's very well known in Japan, and he was a great find for my friend Steven at Fanfare, because he was able to find a lot of these, I'm not going to call them obscure, just they were not known in the West, and bring these works over. And I found one of his books called The Zoo in Winter, which is he had it printed on, it was a hardback, it was in the manga section. I found it in the library, and I was browsing around because I wanted to see how books are being printed. This is right when I was designing books and thinking about what I wanted with the printing. And I found this beautiful book. It was a hardbound manga. It was a little bit oversized. And I opened up the book, and it had this luxurious paper. It was like a slightly warm tone paper that was very smooth. It was not like the toilet paper that was typically printed on, the newsprint. And it was so beautiful that I thought, finally, I found a manga that's printed in hardbound. And it wasn't just the printing, it was the binding. The binding was sewn. It wasn't a junk glue binding that falls apart and cracks. And you have to like stretch the thing open just to see, the inner inches. So they get lost in the binding, the gutter of a glued book. It would lay flat when you open the book. And I thought, this is just a beautiful book. So I reached out and talked to the guy and told him about my passion for beautiful physical books. And that spurned a friendship between he and I. And he actually helped me with fulfillment on Yooka for the UK orders. And I'm going to be working with him a little bit more in the future. I just love the man. He's a good guy, and I love his passion for quality books. Anyway, that extended to, as I was talking to Doug. And did you know that I actually connected Doug with his printer?
I think you might have told me that.
Yeah. It was the printer that we worked with was a U.S.-based printer in Nashville called Jostens. And it was they were the ones that manufactured the book. The actual print manager and the company that really took on, it was the main production company, was API Print. And API, which is run by also a man named Robert, was very excited about the idea of doing this, because so often books are printed overseas, and I really wanted to kind of see if we could do something in the States, and work with a domestic company. And I had bumps in the road, I would say. And Doug, Doug has them as well. Having this being the only book that I printed so far, I can't compare it because I don't know what it would be like with other avenues. And of course, also my book was being printed just as the virus was starting.
Yeah, so you got it right on time.
Really did. But I was also asking this printer to do things that were not typical for them. They had actually never printed a book with my combination of materials before in their 100+ year history. This was a hardbound that was Smythe sewn with a sculpturally embossed cover and a clear holographic foil on a portion of the sculptural embossed elements. And they just had a nightmare.
I got the copy right in front of me.
And I made a mistake too that I learned was my mistake because just not knowing the procedure. If you hold that book in your hand and you run your finger, if you look at the cover, you'll notice that it has a bit of a tangible bumpiness to it.
Yep, I know.
But it's also very subtle. And my original intent was to have that be a very strong relief that you can really see. It would be so deep it would cast shadows. Okay, and the problem with doing that is not this is a design thing here, but you might find this interesting. If you the way that I wanted it to be, this is the way I think, Robert, is I thought, okay, if we make this big beautiful book that has this detailed sculptural embossed element, right, which means it pops out of the book, right? So you have a character in the logo that pops out of the book. If you stick that in a pile of books or you wedge it onto your bookshelf, over time, it's going to get crushed. And so I designed it in such a way so that the border of the book actually is the part that sticks out the furthest. And that way, if you slip it on a shelf, it will collide with another book. The border will actually protect it like a frame. And that way the artwork will not ever get damaged or crushed because it has this frame that protects the inner artwork. Well, as it turns out, that the sculpture, in order to do that, it's what's called a combination emboss deboss, because part of it comes out, part of it goes in, which I found out is also an extremely expensive process.
Oh boy.
Much more expensive than I had projected, because I thought we were going to do a straight deboss. And the other problem with the emboss deboss is you can't get that deep in either direction. And so the result that's there is the best that we could get. And that was unfortunate. And we also had to cut the foil because it wasn't sticking properly using the gloss laminate that we had. So there would be these little air bubbles that would appear under the gloss laminate because it would stick to the foil. And I thought, I can't sell that to customers because if you scratch the cover, it would ruin the foil.
Oh, trust me. I know how that is, that type of... It's similar yet different. The trade paperback that has that laminate film on it, and that eventually that just peels off.
Yeah, it starts to peel off. Yeah.
It's why I have creators now sign inside my trades, because unless I know for certain it doesn't have that, they always sign the inside, and they all agree. Once I tell them, please sign the inside, I don't trust the outside. They're like, I don't blame you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. To put a signature on the inside. Yeah. And, one of the nice things about the signing process, so I did end up offering, like, my thing was a little bit different than what Doug did, because I did compare notes with him because we went to the same printer. The printer offers this process called tip-ins. And the tip-in is kind of cool because what you can do is, here's something that I assume that most people don't think about when you ask for a signed book. Say I do a Kickstarter and I sell 1,000 books, okay? And I say that every copy will be signed, okay? In order to do that, think about 1,000 books stacked up, okay? Those either have to be shipped to me, and then I have to break down the crate and the boxes, and I have to literally open every box, or I have to fly over and sign them at the factory, which means I have to take up room. I have to have them port all these boxes to a room. I literally have to sit there and open every book, and I have to repackage them into boxes so that they can be shipped to the fulfillment center. It's totally impractical. So they have this system called tip-ins, where what they do is they ship me, for example, 1,000 sheets of paper. That's the same paper that they use in the book. And then I will sign the paper, and then they will bind it into the book. And so it's the same effect. The end result is identical. The signature's in the book. It's a signed copy, but the piece of paper was put in actually after the fact. So it only requires a UPS shipment of a single box, and then I just go through page by page, sign every page, ship it back.
Gotcha. I gotcha. And I've seen some of the
Mm-hmm.
books have some of those extra, autograph pages, kind of like your boy Zach's book. Some of his have that, where it's like an extra page in between. There's an autograph one. Now, I know in his case, he does fly over there and do it, but it's the same concept.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's just great that different, and of course, different printers will offer this tip-in process if they're capable. I think it's a really good solution for doing things like signatures. With Yuka, it was different though. I didn't sign the book. I offered to sign a book plate. I had a book plate made that has a gold foil stamp because everything's got to be something. There always has to be something special, Robert, in everything that I do.
Right.
So the book plate has a gold foil stamp on it, and I would sign that, and then that would be packed in and shipped with the book. And that way, the backer could decide if they want to put the book plate with my signature in the cover, or if they want to just keep it out of there.
I gotcha. As opposed to having it in there automatically, you give them that option.
It give them the option, because in the traditional, book plate logic, if you did have a signature in a book, provided the signature is, done in a tasteful way, it can increase the copy of the value of the book. And that will be the case with a book plate, because the book plates are permanent. If you put them in and you take them out, they'll tear up the paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Remove them. Heavy glue on those. So anyway, but yeah.
Yep. Now, one other question was, well, actually, no, let's get back a bit. You wanted me to remind you about talking about focus groups.
Oh,
earlier.
Yes. Okay. What was it that I was going to bring up? Focus group.
You were bringing up about how,
what was I going to say?
How they figure, like these specific things, like the certain color for the cover will somehow get more sales.
I remember. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember. Okay. Yeah. It's more of a funny observation about that type of marketing and why it sometimes is really useless information. Like one thing about focus testing, I've heard the criticism both ways, that it's like, look, if we do focus testing and we say, hey, it's important to know what customers want. We want to ask them, because there's no point in making something that people are not going to want to buy. But at the same time, focus testing can often turn into, we're a little paranoid about what we're making. We're going to ask people what they want, and maybe they'll tell us something that they want, but maybe that's not actually what they want. I've worked on projects in the past where characters' hair color was focus tested, and they'll say, oh, that hair color doesn't work, and we'll have to change the color of the hair. So things like that are kind of, in my opinion, they're missing the forest for the trees, I think. And they also restrict creativity, obviously, because everything is kind of subject to, well, let's check with the fans and see what they want. The
worst is when they bring someone in who they bring the wrong people in for the focus groups.
Or that, yeah.
Look at what happened with I Am Legend. Look at that I Am Legend. They definitely got the wrong focus group there.
Yeah, and focus testing, when you do have individuals giving feedback, also sometimes you have a group bias. You have a situation where somebody feels as though they're telling you what they think you want to hear. You can lead people to go in a certain direction sometimes. You might not be getting truthful responses.
Right.
And so that can really corrupt information. I know that game maker Tim Schafer's talked about his hatred of focus testing in the past. And I would say that but no, the thing that I wanted to mention is an example of not so much directly with focus testing, but with marketing in general, and how you can have information that seems so solid, but it's really it might be total nonsense. An example of that would be you can see how this would fit in with focus testing. Is you rely a little bit too much on data. With, for example, Google advertising, right? So you can have like a Google advertisement for, say, your new product, whatever it is, okay?
Right.
And say you put money into the Google ad, and so what will happen is if somebody Google searches your product, right, the first result that comes back is actually a paid advertisement link, right? But it looks like a normal link. And so when someone is looking for something specifically, and then the first thing that comes up is an advertisement or whatever, very likely people will click on that because that's what they were
Yeah.
looking for, and it's the first result, right?
I hate that. I hate that. I so hate that.
Yeah, it makes you feel like an animal in an experiment. But the thing is, it does work. But here's the thing: if you click on the advertisement, that is tracked as an ad based sale. Okay, or if somebody buys something, they'll say, well, this is an advertisement led sale. But here's the problem, Robert. If you were to search for Google and you had a similar link appear that is not a paid advertisement, it's just a link, you might click it as well. So how do you tell the difference? How do you know with assurance that the reason somebody clicked on that is because of the paid advertisement and not simply because it was the first search result that looked like a link that you might have tried to click on? So a good, I would say, some percentage of those numbers that are claimed to be ad-led numbers might have been incidental anyway. Okay.
Right.
And so in the same sense with focus testing, it can often be the case that you are relying on data that is not really challenged because there's no way to challenge it. Like maybe say, for example, someone said, change the character X, Y, and Z, right? And you make those changes and then the game sells really well. Then the focus test people might say, see, we told you, change those elements,
that whole thing.
and the game would sell well.
It's that
But
like, sorry. I was just saying, it's that whole. Sorry.
Yeah. Right. It's just to wrap up. It's basically that there could be many reasons that the game sells well, and it might have nothing to do with that. In fact, it might even have been a detriment to the sales because their sales may have been even higher. You don't know this unless you have an alternate reality that you can look at where everything else is exactly the same except you have these two different designs and you can see how the sales change. That's the only way that you could get that information. So that kind of thing is very risky to use as informative for production purposes.
It's like those movies or other things that it became a hit, so they latched on that one aspect that I think is what made it a hit, and then they started to say, we need more like that, not realizing.
Right.
I mean, how many dark movies do we have coming out, or dark comics or whatnot? Like, look at after Watchmen. Everyone's saying we need everything to be dark and gritty, not realizing it was dark and gritty for a reason.
Right. That's a perfect example. You can point to a singular element of something successful and say, look, we should do that one single element without knowing whether or not it was a contributing factor to its success.
Yep, and it might have been it might have been a factor, and it might have worked in other regards because you're so shocked by it, like darker and edgier. But as it goes on, eventually you're like, this is getting old real fast.
And worse yet, even if you're correct, and even if that was say the core factor in its success, it doesn't mean that you can repeat that success.
Exactly. Again, the books that came out after Watchmen, some of them got lucky because you were like told they didn't go too far overboard. Once you got into the 90s, then it got so tired and old.
Yeah, right. So yeah, and I mean this, you know what, for practical purposes, if you're somebody who's trying to make it work in the comics industry, this is just the kind of thing I'd say. There's pieces of information like this that could make things go a little bit better for you if you did them just right? Little tiny things that you could do here and there. But the problem is you could do that forever and you can keep, trying to search for the best possible method. But I like settling for the 75 to 80% method where I know that I've got some things that could be done better. I know that there are artistic procedures I could do that would speed up my process, or, maybe there's something that I could do that would be a little bit more appealing with my structure or whatever it is. But if I stop and change my methodology, it's going to interrupt production. It's going to delay production, and I'm not going to get the thing done. So I would much rather proceed with my stupid method than have a brilliant method that takes me 30 years.
You don't want to end up like Duke Nukem Forever with the constant perfectionism.
Nobody wants to end up like Duke Nukem Forever.
Yeah, exactly. No one does.
That's right.
I know. Yeah. Me with my analogies.
No, they're very helpful.
Yep. Well, fine. I thank you very much for coming on, Dave. It's getting pretty long anyway, but getting late. And I got some, I hate to say it. I got to end it up a little short now. I got some things to do, but thank you so
No,
much
that's
for coming
great.
on. Thank you
Oh
so
no,
much for coming on.
thank you. No,
You've
it's all
officially
my
become my
pleasure.
longest. Yep, you've officially become my longest interview.
That's because I never shut up.
I don't then hate you. I don't. I loved it. I loved all your
Well, that's good.
all the details. Yep.
Well, we should do it again. This is a lot of fun.
Yep, definitely. So yeah, thank you so much, and those of you who are watching in, thank you all for joining, and I'll catch you all later. See ya.
All right. Thanks. Bye bye.